welcome to another episode of Beyond the Veil, where I tell you the stories behind our Valentine Wolfe compositions. We're going to be looking at Now I Knew I Lost Her off the album Only Gossamer My Gown for this episode. I think now we'll get the commercial bit out of the way. All episodes of Beyond the Veil are brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. $1 a month gets you the song of the month, and of course, we have to give a big shout out to all the denizens of Montresor Cellar who make this video possible for you. Also, you're all YouTube pros. I think that every YouTuber now is somewhat obliged to say, like, subscribe, hit the bell button. So thank you for doing that. It definitely keeps us making these videos, and we love interacting. We love hearing what you all have to say. Please, if there's any questions or anything you want to know more of that I don't cover, telling you the story of how Now I Knew I Lost Her came to be, please let us know in the comments. We'll also be linking to our Patreon and this particular song right below. So if you want to hear the whole thing after I'm done talking, you know where to click. All right, so let's get to it. Now I Knew I Lost Her of Only Gossamer My Gown. One of the first songs completed for the album, if my memory serves me, almost entirely written by Sarah. When she presented the demo, it was more or less finished. I think I added some arrangement touches and I wrote my own bass parts, but other than that, the song was more or less complete when I first heard it. I think the song was part of our first set, if you don't know what I'm talking about, when we first debuted the Emily Dickinson song collection. We did them at a concert where we wrote a bunch of material and then kind of selected what we liked, and then that's sort of how the writing process of the entire album got finished. But Now I Knew I Lost Her definitely got played at that first set, and I think that one was sort of the early contender for one of my favorite songs, and I still dearly love it. And when I think about this song, I think a lot about the inspirations that came together to make this particular track. I think this track is very austere in that it's about as basic as I think a song structure can be and still be a song. There's not a lot happening in terms of one section, second section, that kind of thing. It's not an Opeth song by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have some progressive death metal influences, or progressive doom metal, I should say. We knew what doom metal was. We were fans of doom metal. Obviously, being metalheads, we were familiar with the early work of Black Sabbath, but I don't know that we ever sat down and said, we're going to start writing doom metal songs. And if you're like, well, doom metal specifically, what do you mean? It's the slow, sludgy, just dark, like painfully slow, heavy, leaden. Everything is just going to fall apart now. Doom. Everything is doomed, right? It's that kind of metal. It's the opposite of the Sabaton, hey, 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 everything is great type stuff. Not that everything is great in the Sabaton song. I should do a whole other episode about that. But most of the bands who were doing doom metal that we heard or that we played with who did it really well seemed to kind of have a different aesthetic from us. They weren't, they liked, we had common ground in that we heard a love for this big heavy slab of sound, but not the stories they were trying to tell and things like that. So we liked a lot of that music, but we never really wanted to write a lot of it. And that sort of changed about the time we heard a band called Oceans of Slumber live. We were up in North Carolina. We heard them opening from one of our favorite bands, Insomnium, and I know some people have very mixed feelings about Oceans of Slumber. I do not. For a while, anytime anybody said, I need to hear some new metal, I was like, you must listen to this band. That was when The Banished Heart was out. They have a new album just called Oceans of Slumber. I cannot recommend that record enough. And so when we did 2018's The Haunting of Mary Shelley, we experimented a lot with what we called the Oceans of Slumber texture. There's one song even in particular that before it had a title, I kept referring to it as our Oceans of Slumber song. So And then from the classical perspective, for me, there's certain bow strokes you find a lot in Mahler symphonies that felt the same. So adding that kind of feel to Now I Knew I Lost Her was definitely something we wanted to experiment with. So let's take a listen to the intro groove a little bit and kind of hear that kind of sort of chugging, stabby rhythm I'm talking about. So, one thing that I find very helpful as a creator is when you find any artist you admire or that that gets you inspired to write. When they talk about the music that inspired them, you should pay attention. I have found that to be very helpful. One of the first things, even when I find a band that I like, is like, well, who are they listening to? I think a lot of the influences on Valentine Wolfe may not be readily apparent to people, especially if you're not super familiar with our music. Obviously, we get a lot of Nightwish when people say we think you sound like, and we love Nightwish. That I think that they really paved the way for a lot of bands like us. But I don't think it's really as apparent that I really love the Sisters of Mercy. With the whole "why don't we have a drummer" thing, like they're in my mind whenever I get that question. If you've ever asked me that and I've given you a very polite answer, you should know probably what I'm thinking is, well, I don't know, it's working out pretty well for the Sisters of Mercy. And that's not to say I think people have a good reason for giving me that feedback, but we have no intention of ever getting a drummer, and that's no disrespect to the amazing drummers out there that we know, but it's very intentional for us. And I think that what Now I Knew I Lost Her, where I think the parallel is it does have that very austere, sort of severe. It's pretty much a section, a B section. If you are ever listening to music and you're like, how do I know when's the A and how do I know when's the B? If the sections do not sound alike, if they contrast, you have an A section, you have a B section. We repeat the groove a little bit in the middle. We kind of finish our thought. There's a little bit of a break, and then we sort of wrap it up. There's not much to the song, and for me, that austerity is really, I hear it a lot in the old school 80s goth rock, that it may not be super obvious that we love as much as we love bands like Nightwish or Iron Maiden, but they're in there. And I think for this song in particular, that's a really big influence, as well as this sort of, I guess, overall mood Oceans of Slumber gave us. And then, because I really like progressive metal and because I really love, I already alluded to Opeth, the band where if you start trying to do the A, B, C, D, whatever analysis, assigning a letter for a new section with Opeth, you get some insane looking World War II code in front of you. That was my instinct for Now I Knew I Lost Her, but I think that the more we looked at the lyrics and the more we took Emily Dickinson's poetry apart, again, that severity, that saying what you need to say, and these very, very compact poems just worked really beautifully. And in talking with Sarah Moore about how she chose to set the lyrics, that sort of compact repetition was her way of representing Emily's poems faithfully in the music. And when she explained that to me, we had already written and performed Now I Knew I Lost Her a few times, and all of a sudden it clicked. I was like, okay, this makes sense to me. I get what we're trying to do and how it's going to work. When I say texture in music, I just mean all the things you're hearing at once. I'm going to let us just hear a little snippet of the intro to Now I Knew I Lost Her. And what I want you to listen for, there's a very bleak synthesizer sound going on. You'll hear piano. You might hear what we call the clean arco bass parts, meaning that they just don't have any distortion on them. It's straight from the late 18th century symphony rhythmic songbook. And then, of course, the roaring distortion in the drums. So that's what you're listening for, and that's what I mean by texture. We chose to be very opulent and lush with our textures. That's something we really like in Valentine Wolfe. That's the visual influence of films like Crimson Peak on us. So that meant that structurally this song didn't need very much. The other interesting thing here in what I call the chorus or the B section, if you listen here where the mood kind of lightens a little bit. With those chord changes, actually, we were inspired by another hero of ours, Ronnie James Dio. We've played Holy Diver a few times. I think one of our most viewed videos on the channel is Rainbow in the Dark, which we still enjoy playing, but we play it quite a bit differently now. We might have to, I don't know, revise that someday. But when we played Rainbow, rather than playing exactly what Vivian Campbell did on the guitar part, and since I'm only one person and I didn't want to trigger a lot of loops or whatever, I kind of rewrote the rhythm of this one section of Holy Diver. And when I was trying to figure out what part to put in Now I Knew I Lost Her, Holy Diver is also in C minor. Now I Knew I Lost Her is in C minor. I had the inspiration of let's just play that thing I did whenever we were playing Holy Diver, and it worked really well. Sarah seemed to like it. I thought it fit with the song, so there's echoes of Ronnie James Dio, 18th century Sturm und Drang symphonies, Oceans of Slumber, and The Sisters of Mercy, all crammed into this humble little track that has a intro, an A section, and a B section, an interlude, and a B section reprise, and that's pretty much all there is to that song. So it's one of our favorites to play. I know I say that a lot about our songs, but this one has just been a lot of fun. It's been in the set list a lot. It's pretty low in Sarah's vocal tessitura, so sometimes we talk about should we play it or not, or when we have longer sets, we definitely try to throw it in because then we have time to make some adjustments and make sure you can hear all of her beautiful singing and beautiful lyrics. Lyrically, I will say two things about this. The first is, as I've mentioned in previous episodes of Beyond the Veil, people have asked us, the subject has come up, is it very difficult, or was it very difficult or challenging at all to take Emily Dickinson's poetry and make gothic metal lyrics out of it? And the answer was not even a little bit. And I'm not trying to say anything critical about the education I received in high school and everything, but I do think Emily Dickinson is worth reconsidering. I've really, through the whole process of Only Gossamer My Gown, and even when we play these songs now, I realized that there was a completely different side to her that I never got to see, and Now I Knew I Lost Her is one of the prime examples of that. And I think that the tragedy and the pathos of those lyrics, at least for Sarah, she tells me that these lyrics definitely show how little has changed for women in some ways since the 19th century. That may be something we expand upon a lot later, but I think that there's this sense of mourning, there's this sense of defeat, but I think there's even a little bit of rage in there. So it needed that sort of heavy, relentless, just chugging rhythm that we did with it. So all of these things I think kind of happened, um, at least in our imaginations, way quicker than it's taking me to explain to you. And sometimes I would say the interesting thing is, for me, I don't even know that all that stuff is in the song until after we've done with the demo and we go back and we listen to it. But it's a very powerful song. I think it's sandwiched between two tracks. If you remember the previous episode, I talked about Because I Could Not Stop for Death and how that's one of my favorite tracks. And I think sometimes because of some of the technical challenges, not in terms of musicianship, but in terms of just dialing in a great live sound, it kind of gets omitted from the set list, certainly more than I think either one of us would like. I think it's, I don't want to say overlooked, but this song really was one that once it kind of took its final form, we really knew what the entire rest of the record was really going to sound like and what it needed to be. So, again, like I said, there's a link in the comments to the track, so take a listen to it, see if you can maybe hear some of the things I was talking about. Leave us a question in the comments, anything that you may want to know, if there's anything specific you'd like me to elaborate on, any suggestions for subsequent episodes of Beyond the Veil, which will be back. We're took a surprise week off last week, but I'll get you your next episode a week from now with The Frost of Death. So thank you so much for listening. Thanks to our patrons for making this possible. And I hope you take some time and take a listen to Now I Knew I Lost Her.